There was a time when the universe was filled with light, not just the light of one star or one galaxy, but trillions of suns burning across an endless cosmic ocean. Every star you've ever seen, and every star you never could, was part of a temporary phase, because stars are not permanent structures. They are processes. They exist only while the universe allows matter to burn, and one day the last one will stop. No explosion that changes everything. No final cosmic signal. No announcement written across the sky. Just silence. In this documentary, we will follow the universe forward in time, past galaxies, past black holes, past everything familiar, to the moment when the asterisk final star in existence dies. We'll explore what the universe looks like after that light is gone, what continues to move, what still changes, and what it truly means for a universe with no stars left to burn. This is not science fiction. Everything you're about to hear is based on accepted astrophysics, cosmology, and long-term models of the universe's evolution. If you enjoy long-form cosmic journeys like this, calm, accurate, and designed for deep listening, you can subscribe now and return whenever the universe grows quiet again. Now, let's begin at the moment when the stars are almost gone. For most of the universe's history, light has been abundant. Stars formed easily, almost effortlessly, wherever gravity could gather enough gas. Vast clouds of hydrogen collapsed, ignited, and filled space with radiation. Galaxies glowed. Nebulae burned. The night sky, if there were eyes to see it, was crowded with fire. But that era was never meant to last. Stars are not an eternal feature of the universe. They are a consequence of very specific conditions that are slowly disappearing as the universe expands, cools, and runs out of usable fuel. To understand what happens when the last star dies, we first need to understand how stars stop being born. The slow end of star formation. Right now, the universe is already past its peak of star formation. About 10 billion years ago, stars were forming at a furious rate. Galaxies were rich in cold hydrogen gas, the raw material for stellar birth. Collisions between galaxies compressed that gas even further, triggering waves of new stars. But expansion changed everything. As space stretches, gas becomes more diffuse. Gravity has a harder time pulling matter together. The clouds that once collapsed easily now remain too thin, too warm, too spread out. Star formation doesn't stop suddenly. It fades. Galaxies slowly exhaust their reserves of cold hydrogen. What gas remains becomes locked inside long-lived stars or expelled into intergalactic space, never to collapse again. Eventually, galaxies reach a quiet phase. They still contain stars, but they no longer make new ones. The universe enters what astronomers call the stelliferous era's decline, the long twilight of starlight. The last places where stars can still form as conditions worsen. Only certain stars can still be born. Large, bright stars, the kind that burn hot and die young, disappear first. They require dense clouds and abundant fuel. When the environment becomes too thin, they simply can't form anymore. What remains are the smallest stars, red dwarfs. These stars are dim, cool, and incredibly efficient. They burn their hydrogen so slowly that a single red dwarf can shine for trillions of years, far longer than the current age of the universe. As the cosmos ages, red dwarfs become dominant. They outnumber all other stars combined, and they outlive them by an enormous margin. In the far future, almost every shining object in the universe will be one of these faint red embers. But even red dwarfs are not immortal. They are just very patient. A universe growing darker, not colder. Yet for a long time, the universe still feels alive. Galaxies drift apart, but inside them, stars continue to orbit. Planets still circle suns. Time still feels familiar. This is not a dramatic collapse. It's a gradual dimming. Bright blue stars vanish first. Yellow stars like our sun follow. What's left is a population of aging red dwarfs, quietly burning in near isolation. The universe does not notice this change in any obvious way. Physics continues. Particles move, gravity operates, but the character of the cosmos is shifting. Light is becoming rare. When the final stars are born, there will come a point, unimaginably far in the future, when the very last stars are born. These final births will not happen in grand spiral galaxies filled with gas. They will occur in small, isolated pockets where gravity manages one last victory over expansion. A thin cloud collapses, fusion ignites, a tiny red dwarf is born, and then nothing like it ever happens again. No new stars anywhere. From that moment onward, the universe contains a fixed number of stars. Every point of light that will ever exist already exists. The universe has crossed an irreversible boundary. Trillions of years of waiting after star formation ends, the universe enters an era of extreme longevity. For trillions of years, red dwarfs continue to shine. Their light is faint but steady. They change very slowly, barely evolving over spans of time that dwarf human comprehension. Galaxies continue to drift apart due to cosmic expansion. Eventually, each galaxy becomes isolated, surrounded by an ever-growing void. Inside those isolated islands of matter, stars still burn, but nothing new appears. This is a universe that is no longer creative. It only consumes what it already has. The nature of stellar death changes in today's universe. Stars die violently. Massive stars explode as supernovae. Neutron stars and black holes are born in spectacular fashion. But in the era of the last stars, death is quieter. Red dwarfs do not explode. They slowly exhaust their hydrogen fuel, converting it into helium over trillions of years. Eventually, even that process stops. Fusion ceases. The star cools. What remains is a dark, dense object called a black dwarf, a stellar corpse that emits no light at all. These black dwarfs do not yet exist today. The universe is not old enough, but one day every star that ever lived will become one. The meaning of the last star. When we talk about the last star dying, we are not talking about a single dramatic moment. There is no cosmic countdown clock, no universal observer. Instead, there is a final sequence. One red dwarf somewhere in the universe burns its last usable fuel. Its internal fusion reactions fall below the threshold needed to produce light. And then, the universe contains no shining stars, not one. This does not trigger an explosion. It does not collapse space. It does not announce itself. The universe simply becomes dark. A universe without starlight. After the last star dies, the universe still exists. Matter still exists. Particles still interact. Black holes still orbit. But there is no natural source of visible light anymore. No sunrise, no stellar glow. No illumination beyond the faint radiation left over from the Big Bang, stretched thin by expansion. The cosmos becomes a place defined by absence rather than presence. Darkness is no longer the background, it is the default. Why this moment matters. The death of the last star marks the end of something fundamental. Stars are not just light sources, they are engines of complexity. They forge heavy elements, they power chemistry, they create environments where structure can persist. Without stars, the universe loses its ability to sustain complexity in the way it once did. This is not the end of existence, but it is the end of the universe as a place of ongoing creation. From here on, the story changes. In the next part, we will explore what fills the universe after starlight is gone, what still moves, what still evolves, and what new kind of darkness begins to dominate cosmic time. When the last star dies, nothing dramatic happens. No wave moves across space. No final flash marks the moment. No boundary separates the universe with stars from the universe without them. The change is quiet. One moment, somewhere in the vast darkness, a red dwarf completes its final fusion reaction. For trillions of years it has been converting hydrogen into helium, releasing a faint, steady glow. Now even that slow process can no longer continue. The reactions stop, the light fades. and the universe enters a new condition, one it has never experienced before, a universe with no stars at all. What still exists after the last star? It's tempting to imagine this moment as the end of everything, but that would be misleading. The universe does not vanish when the stars are gone, it becomes something else. Galaxies still exist, though they are no longer galaxies in the way we understand them today. They are collections of dark stellar remnants, black dwarfs, neutron stars, white dwarfs, and black holes, bound together by gravity. Planets still exist too. Countless worlds continue to orbit objects that no longer shine. Frozen, lightless, drifting through eternal night, atoms still exist. Forces still operate. Time still passes. But the universe has lost its primary source of free energy, and that changes everything. Dark dwarfs, the ashes of stars. The most common objects in this future universe are black dwarfs. These are the final remnants of stars that were never massive enough to explode. After exhausting their fuel, they cool endlessly, radiating away the last traces of heat until they become almost indistinguishable from the surrounding darkness. A black dwarf is not a black hole. It does not bend space dramatically. It does not consume matter. It simply exists, cold, dense, silent. Over unimaginable spans of time, these objects dominate the cosmic landscape. They outnumber every other type of stellar remnant. The universe is now filled with the corpses of stars, intact but lifeless. The fate of planets without stars. What happens to planets when their stars are gone? Some are ejected long before this era, flung into interstellar space by gravitational interactions. Others remain bound, orbiting a dark central object that no longer provides warmth or light. On these planets, temperatures fall toward absolute zero. Any remaining atmosphere freezes or collapses onto the surface. Chemistry slows until reactions become almost impossible. Even radioactive decay, one of the last internal heat sources, eventually diminishes. These worlds do not explode, they do not crumble. They simply freeze into permanence. Time passes but nothing changes. A universe defined by motion, not light. Although the universe is dark, it is not static. Objects still move. Black dwarfs orbit each other. Neutron stars pass silently through space. Black holes drift through the remains of galaxies. Gravity still shapes trajectories. Over immense timescales, gravitational interactions continue to rearrange matter. Some objects collide, others are ejected into the ever-expanding void between galaxies. But these interactions become increasingly rare. As space expands, distances grow larger. Encounters become less frequent. The universe becomes more isolated, more empty, more quiet. Black holes become the dominant actors in a universe without stars. Black holes take center stage. They are the only objects capable of significantly altering their surroundings. Their gravity influences nearby matter, and when they merge, they release energy, not as light, but as gravitational waves. These waves ripple through space-time itself, carrying information across the cosmos, even in total darkness. But even black holes are not eternal. They too have an ending, the long fade of black holes. According to modern physics, black holes slowly lose mass through a process known as Hawking radiation. This radiation is incredibly weak. For stellar mass black holes, it takes far longer than the current age of the universe for any noticeable change to occur. But given enough time, far more time than stars ever had, black holes evaporate, they shrink, they weaken. They disappear. The last black holes to go are the largest ones, the supermassive black holes that once sat at the centers of galaxies. Their lifetimes are almost incomprehensible, trillions upon trillions of years, but eventually even they fade away. Before that, a universe of collisions. Long before black holes vanish completely, another strange phase begins. In a universe dominated by cold remnants, random collisions become more important. Black dwarfs collide with other black dwarfs. Neutron stars collide with black dwarfs. Occasionally, a collision releases enough energy to briefly reignite fusion. For a fleeting moment, a new star can appear, not born from a nebula, but from violence. These are called rejuvenated stars, and they are extremely rare, but they do not last. They burn briefly and die, leaving the universe dark once again. Each one is a temporary exception, not a reversal of fate. The disappearance of complexity as free energy becomes scarce, complexity begins to fail. Stars once provided energy gradients that powered chemistry, motion, and structure. Without them, the universe loses its ability to sustain organized processes. Molecules stop reacting, structures stop forming, information stops flowing. Not abruptly, but inevitably. This is not because physics breaks. It's because physics runs out of useful pathways. The universe approaches a condition where change becomes almost impossible. Entropy takes control. This future is governed by entropy, the gradual spread and dilution of energy. Entropy does not destroy matter. It does not erase space. It removes differences. Hot and cold become the same. Dense and sparse even out. Motion slows. Without stars to reset these gradients, entropy dominates everything. The universe drifts toward a state where nothing interesting can happen anymore. Is this the end? Not yet. Even after the last star and the last black hole are gone, the universe still exists. Particles remain, quantum fields remain, space and time remain, but the universe has lost its ability to create new structures. What remains is a vast, cold, dark expanse, sometimes called the heat death of the universe, a state where everything that can happen has already happened, a different kind of darkness. This darkness is not emptiness. It is fullness without activity. The universe is filled with matter and energy, but arranged in a way that prevents further change. Nothing breaks the silence because nothing has the energy to do so. This is the long future after the last star. And yet, even here, physics does not stop. In the next part, we will explore the final, almost unimaginable eras of cosmic time, where even matter itself begins to change, decay, or disappear, and where the universe approaches its ultimate limits. The story continues, just not in light anymore. Long after the last star has died, and long after the universe has gone dark, something even more fundamental begins to change. At first, nothing seems different. Space is still there, time still passes, matter still exists, but the universe has entered an era where nothing new can be built, only slowly undone. This is the age when matter itself becomes unstable, not violently, not suddenly, but patiently, a universe made of remnants. By this point, the cosmos is no longer structured by galaxies or stars. What remains are scattered remnants, black dwarfs drifting alone, neutron stars locked in silent orbits, elementary particles spread thin across expanding space. There is no center, no edge, no direction that means anything. Each region of space becomes increasingly isolated from every other. Expansion has stretched the universe so far that even the concept of nearby loses relevance. Light cannot cross these distances anymore, neither can gravity in any meaningful way. Every pocket of matter becomes its own quiet island. The question physics can't avoid at this stage. Physics asks an uncomfortable question. Is matter truly permanent? For most of human history, atoms were assumed to be eternal. They could rearrange, combine, break apart, but the building blocks themselves were thought to last forever. Modern physics is less certain. According to many theoretical models, even the most stable particles may eventually decay, not explode, not collapse, simply transform into something else, or disappear. The possible decay of protons, one of the most important questions in fundamental physics, is whether protons decay. Protons are the core of atoms. Every star, planet, and molecule that ever existed depends on them. Some grand unified theories predict that protons are not truly stable. They suggest an almost unimaginably slow decay process, with a half-life longer than 10 years. That number is not a typo. It means that if protons do decay, they do so slowly that the universe must be trillions of times older than it is now before the effect becomes noticeable. But given enough time, even rare events become common, and the universe has nothing but time. What proton decay would do if protons decay, atoms cannot survive. Molecules dissolve, solid matter disintegrates. Even the densest remnants, black dwarfs and neutron stars, slowly lose their identity. Matter turns into radiation. Radiation spreads out. Everything becomes simpler. This is not destruction in the usual sense, it is a gradual erasure of structure. Over immense timescales, objects that once seemed permanent become faint clouds of energy drifting through space. A universe without objects, eventually the universe may reach a state where objects no longer exist. No stars, no planets, no remnants, only elementary particles, sparsely distributed, rarely interacting. Distances are so vast that collisions become nearly impossible. Even when particles do meet, they pass through one another with little consequence. Change slows to a crawl. The universe does not end. It becomes almost motionless. Time becomes meaningless. In this era, time loses its familiar meaning. Clocks require change, processes, cycles. But when nothing happens, time becomes difficult to define. Physics still describes a flow of time, but nothing marks its passage. No events distinguish one moment from the next. The universe enters a state of near-eternal sameness. Quantum fields still exist even now, something remains. Quantum fields, the underlying fabric of reality, do not vanish when matter disappears. They fill space. They fluctuate. They persist. Empty space is never truly empty. But these fluctuations are tiny. They do not build complexity. They do not create stars or structures. They are background noise in a universe that has grown too quiet for anything else. Could something new ever happen? In theory, quantum mechanics allows rare fluctuations that could briefly create particles. But in a universe this old and this expanded, such events are unimaginably rare, and even if they occur, there is nothing to sustain them. No stars to power chemistry, no gradients to support structure, no environment for complexity to grow. Each fluctuation fades almost as soon as it appears. The universe has no memory left. The final role of black holes. If any black holes remain at this stage, they are the last complex objects in existence. But even they are changing. Hawking radiation continues its slow work. Black holes lose mass particle by particle, shrinking over inconceivable timescales. Eventually, even the largest black holes evaporate completely. Their disappearance is quiet. No explosion, no final collapse. Just absence where gravity once dominated. After the last black hole, when the final black hole disappears, the universe enters one of its strangest states. There are no massive objects left to shape space-time. Only low-energy particles and radiation drifting through an ever-expanding void. This may be the closest the universe ever comes to true emptiness. But even this is not absolute nothing. The question of eternity, does this state last forever? Physics does not know. Some theories suggest space continues expanding endlessly, cooling forever. Others propose subtle changes in the structure of space-time itself. There are even ideas where vacuum energy changes, altering the rules entirely. But if nothing dramatic intervenes, the universe remains in this diluted, featureless condition for eternity. No stars, no matter, no events. Just space, time, and silence. Why this matters? The death of the last star was not the end of the universe. It was the beginning of a far longer ending, a process where complexity slowly unravels layer by layer until even matter itself becomes optional. This future is not hostile. It is indifferent. Physics does not mourn what is lost. It simply follows its equations. In the next part, we will explore the deepest limits of this process, the ultimate fate of space, time, and the vacuum itself, and whether the universe truly settles into silence, or if something even stranger waits beyond. After matter fades, after stars and remnants dissolve into near nothing, there is a temptation to believe the universe has finished its journey. But physics does not end with matter. It began with something deeper. And in the far future, that deeper layer becomes all that remains. What is left when matter is gone, even in a universe emptied of stars, planets, atoms, and particles, space itself still exists. Not as an empty container, but as an active structure. Space is not nothing. It has properties. It has energy. It has rules. Modern physics describes space as a dynamic entity, a fabric shaped by fields, fluctuations, and constants that do not disappear simply because matter does. This is where the universe's final story shifts focus, from objects to the vacuum itself. The vacuum is not empty. For most of human history, vacuum meant absence, but quantum physics changed that idea completely. What we call empty space is actually filled with quantum fields. These fields fluctuate constantly, even at absolute zero temperature. Particles briefly appear and vanish. Energy rises and falls. Nothing ever fully settles. This restless background has always existed, even when the universe was bright with stars. Now, in the far future, it becomes the dominant feature of reality. Dark energy takes over completely. One of the most mysterious components of the universe is dark energy, a form of energy embedded in space itself, driving the expansion of the universe. Today, dark energy already dominates the cosmos. In the far future, after matter thins out and structures dissolve, dark energy becomes everything. Galaxies are no longer relevant. Distances grow faster than any signal can cross. Every remaining particle becomes causally isolated. Space expands not because something pushes it, but because expansion is what space does. A universe beyond interaction. As expansion accelerates, interaction becomes impossible. Particles move away from each other faster than light could ever travel between them. Not because they are moving through space quickly, but because space itself is stretching between them. Causality breaks down. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, mathematical one. Regions of the universe become permanently disconnected. No signal, no force, no influence can pass between them. The universe fractures into countless isolated domains, each one alone, time without change. Time still exists in this future, but it loses its defining features. Change becomes so rare that time no longer feels like a process. No cycles, no events, no evolution. Physics still describes time mathematically, but without interactions, time becomes an abstract parameter rather than a lived sequence. The universe enters an era where nothing distinguishes one moment from the next. Can space decay? This raises one of the deepest questions in modern physics. Is space itself stable? Just as stars burn fuel and matter may decay, could the vacuum also change? Some theories suggest that the vacuum we live in is not the lowest possible energy state. It may be metastable, temporarily stable, but not permanent. If that is true, then even in a universe stripped of matter, something dramatic could still occur. Vacuum decay, a silent transition. Vacuum decay is one of the most unsettling ideas in physics. It suggests that the fundamental state of space could suddenly shift to a lower energy configuration. If this happened, it would not explode outward like a bomb. It would expand at nearly the speed of light. Nothing could outrun it. Nothing could detect it in advance. Within that region, the laws of physics would be different. Atoms could not exist. Particles might have different masses. Structures would be impossible. Reality itself would be incompatible with complexity. No warning, no after if. Vacuum decay occurs, it is not something the universe recovers from. It is not destruction in the conventional sense. It is replacement. One version of space is replaced by another. There is no observer outside the process. No frame of reference to say before and after. From the inside, there would be no experience of the transition. One moment existence is allowed, the next it is not. Does this happen eventually? Physics does not know. Vacuum decay may never occur. It may be impossible, or it may be inevitable on timescales so long that the question loses meaning. What matters is not prediction, but permission. The laws of physics do not forbid it, and that fact alone changes how we think about the universe's future. A universe that does not promise continuation at this stage. The universe is no longer a story of decline. It is a story of non-commitment. Nothing in physics promises that space will remain as it is forever. Nothing guarantees stability. The universe does not sign contracts with its own future. It simply behaves, moment by moment, according to its rules. The final kind of silence, if vacuum decay never happens, the universe may persist indefinitely in a state of accelerated expansion and near total emptiness. If it does happen, the universe ends not with collapse or fire, but with a quiet incompatibility. Either way, the final silence is not dramatic, it is structural. There is no villain, no failure, no mistake, just physics following its equations to their logical conclusion. Why space becomes the main character in the beginning. Stars shaped the universe. Later, black holes dominated it. Eventually, matter itself faded from relevance. In the end, space is all that remains. Its properties determine whether anything can exist at all. This is the deepest layer of the universe, the stage beneath every story that ever unfolded. What comes next? In the next part, we will confront the final question. If space, time, matter, and even the vacuum have no obligation to persist, what does it mean for existence to happen at all? Not philosophically, but physically, because by the end the universe is no longer about what exists, but about why anything was ever allowed to exist in the first place. By the time matter has thinned, stars have vanished, and space itself has become the dominant feature of reality, the universe reaches a strange condition, not an ending, a pause without expectation. Everything that once felt solid has revealed itself to be conditional. Stars depended on fuel, matter depended on stability. Even the vacuum depended on a delicate balance of fields and constants. Nothing was guaranteed. This realization does not arrive with an event, it arrives as an absence, the absence of anything left that can fail dramatically. From this point forward, the universe does not behave like a system moving toward a conclusion. It behaves like a system that has stopped making commitments. A reality without momentum. Earlier eras of the universe were driven by momentum. Star formation created structure. Gravity assembled matter. Energy flowed from hot to cold. Now, momentum is gone. There is no process pushing the universe towards something new. Expansion continues, but it does not build complexity. It only increases separation. Nothing accumulates. Nothing resets. Nothing begins. The universe enters a state where the future is no longer shaped by the past. Why prediction loses meaning? In earlier times, prediction was possible because patterns repeated. Stars followed life cycles. Galaxies evolved in recognizable ways. Physical systems behaved within known ranges. But when systems lose the ability to change meaningfully, prediction stops being useful. Not because physics fails, but because nothing happens that requires prediction. Time continues, but without milestones. The universe becomes a place where duration exists without direction. The disappearance of cause and effect. Cause and effect rely on interaction. One event influences another. Energy transfers. Information moves. In the far future, interaction becomes so rare that cause and effect lose practical relevance. Particles are too far apart. Energy differences are too small. Signals cannot travel between isolated regions. Physics still describes causality, but there is nothing left for it to act upon. The universe does not violate its laws. It simply has no use for them anymore. The quiet dominance of expansion never stops. Space continues to stretch, not because something drives it from outside, but because expansion is embedded in the structure of space-time itself. As space grows, everything else becomes less significant. Distances increase, density drops, the universe becomes smoother, emptier, more uniform. Eventually, there are no features left large enough to matter. The universe approaches perfect sameness. What uniformity means, uniformity is not destruction. It is equality. Every region of space becomes like every other. No gradients remain. No pockets of activity stand out. This is not chaos. It is order taken to its extreme. Perfect order leaves nothing for physics to do. Does the universe notice? There is no mechanism by which the universe can notice its own condition. There is no internal observer, no feedback loop, no corrective response. The universe does not adjust itself when it becomes empty, it simply continues. This is an important point. Nothing in physics requires the universe to be interesting. Interest is a human category, not a physical one. Existence without witness. At this stage, there may be no observers anywhere, no systems capable of awareness, no processes complex enough to register change. But the universe does not require witnesses to exist. Existence does not depend on observation. Space does not collapse without someone watching it. Reality continues, unobserved, unrecorded, and unconcerned. The last assumption to break. There is one assumption that lingers longer than the rest. The idea that existence must lead somewhere, that if time continues, something must eventually happen. Physics does not support this assumption. Time can pass without events. Duration does not guarantee change. The universe can persist indefinitely without producing anything new. Why this is not a failure? It is tempting to see this state as a failure of the universe, a waste, a collapse of potential. But physics does not measure success or failure. The universe did not miss an opportunity, it followed its rules. For a time, those rules allowed complexity. Later, they did not. Nothing about this is tragic from a physical standpoint. Tragedy requires expectation. The universe does not expect itself to be anything. Stories depend on direction, beginnings, middles, endings. The far future of the universe has none of these. There is no climax, no resolution, no final act, just persistence. Reality without narrative. The meaning of no warning. Earlier, the idea that the universe could end without warning felt unsettling. Now, warning itself feels misplaced. Warnings are tools for systems that anticipate change. The universe does not anticipate. It transitions. If something like vacuum decay were to occur, it would not break a promise. There was no promise. Stability was temporary, not contractual. What remains when expectation is gone, when expectation dissolves, something quieter takes its place. Accuracy. You no longer ask the universe to be stable. You no longer assume continuation. You no longer treat persistence as a right. You recognize existence as conditional, moment by moment. And conditional existence does not require reassurance. It simply occurs, the final character of the universe. By this era, the universe has revealed its final character. It is not hostile, it is not benevolent, it is not empty in the absolute sense. It is indifferent to continuation. It allows states while they are allowed. When conditions change, those states end. No drama, no announcement. What comes after this from here? Only two possibilities remain. Either the universe continues indefinitely in this quiet, uniform state, or something fundamental about space itself changes. Not because the universe decides to end, but because its deepest structure permits transition. In the next part, we will examine that final possibility, not as speculation, but as a consequence of how physics treats space, energy, and stability. Because even at the end of everything familiar, the universe still does not promise tomorrow. By the time the universe reaches its quietest state, it has shed almost everything that once defined it. No stars, no galaxies, no complex matter, no meaningful interaction. What remains is space, time, and the underlying fields that give them structure. And here, At the deepest level of reality, physics confronts its final uncertainty. Not about how the universe behaves, but about whether it must continue behaving this way at all. Stability is an assumption, not a guarantee. Throughout this journey, one pattern has repeated. Stars were assumed stable until fuel ran out. Matter was assumed permanent until decay became possible. Structures were assumed enduring until expansion dissolved them. Now the same question reaches the vacuum itself. Is the fabric of space stable, or is it only temporarily allowed to exist in its current form? Modern physics does not answer this with confidence. Instead, it leaves the door open. What the vacuum really is, the vacuum is not emptiness. It is the lowest energy state of all quantum fields combined. But lowest does not necessarily mean lowest possible. In many theories, the vacuum we inhabit is a false vacuum. A local minimum, not the absolute bottom, like a ball resting in a shallow valley rather than the deepest one. It feels stable, it behaves stable, but it is not fundamentally locked in place. The meaning of metastability physicists use the term metastable to describe systems that are stable for long periods but not forever. A metastable system can persist for immense durations without change, but the laws governing it still permit transition. No external trigger is required, no warning signal is generated. No countdown exists, the transition happens or it doesn't, and nothing inside the system can predict when. Vacuum decay revisited. Vacuum decay is the name given to this hypothetical transition. If the vacuum were to decay, a tiny region of space would tunnel into a lower energy state. From that point, the new vacuum would expand outward at nearly the speed of light, not as a wave of destruction, as a replacement. Within that region, the constants of nature could be different. Particle masses could change. Forces could behave differently. Atoms might be impossible, not damaged. Impossible, no experience of the event. One of the most unsettling aspects of vacuum decay is that it cannot be experienced. There is no moment of awareness, no transition from one state to another. From inside the old vacuum, existence simply ends. From the outside, there is no outside. The concept of after does not apply. This is not annihilation, it is incompatibility. Why physics cannot warn us? Warnings require signals. Signals require time. Vacuum decay does not propagate information ahead of itself. The region of change expands at the same speed as any signal that could carry news of it. By the time a warning could arrive, the event has already occurred. This is not a limitation of technology. It is a limitation of causality. Is vacuum decay likely? Physics does not say that vacuum decay will happen. It says that it can. Experiments at particle accelerators, such as those studying the Higgs field, suggest that our vacuum may be metastable, but not conclusively. The lifetime of the vacuum, if it is metastable, could be far longer than the age of the universe, or it could be shorter, or the vacuum could be absolutely stable. Physics does not know. And importantly, physics does not require an answer. Why time does not reduce the risk? There is a common intuition that if something has not happened yet, it is less likely to happen later. This intuition fails in metastable systems. In a truly metastable vacuum, the probability of decay does not increase or decrease with time in the usual way. Each moment is independent. The universe is not getting closer to decay, but it is also not moving farther away from it. Every moment carries the same permission. A universe without insurance. This is the final layer of uncertainty. Even after matter fades, even after expansion empties space, even after entropy smooths everything out, at its most fundamental level, reality is allowed, not promised. There is no cosmic safeguard, no emergency mechanism, no clause that enforces permanence. Why this is not catastrophic thinking? It may feel unsettling to realize that physics allows for an unannounced ending, but this is not a prediction of doom. It is an observation about structure. The universe does not behave like a system designed for survival. It behaves like a system governed by equations that permit certain states and forbid others. As long as the current vacuum is permitted, existence continues. When it is not, it doesn't. No drama required. Comparing this to other endings, compared to heat death, vacuum decay is not a gradual fading. Compared to big crunch models, it is not a collapse. Compared to big rip scenarios, it is not a tearing apart. It is the simplest ending imaginable, instantaneous, silent, total. And yet, physics treats it with neutrality. Why silence is the key feature. The most striking feature of this possibility is not destruction, it is silence. No precursor, no disturbance, no signal. The universe does not clear its throat before changing state, it simply changes. This is not unique to vacuum decay, it is a pattern repeated throughout physics. Transitions do not announce themselves, they occur when conditions allow. The final reduction. By this point in cosmic history, everything has been reduced to its essentials. No structure, no complexity, no creation. Only the rules themselves remain. And even those rules may not be fixed. This is where physics reaches its limit. Not because it fails, but because it describes a system that does not explain itself. What this means for the idea of an ending without warning, is only terrifying if warning is expected. Physics does not support that expectation. The universe does not communicate intention. It does not promise continuation. It does not owe explanation. It behaves. What comes next? There is only one remaining question. If existence is conditional at every level, stars, matter, space, and even the vacuum, then what does it mean that the universe exists at all? Not philosophically, but physically. In the next part we will turn to that question, not to resolve it, but to understand why physics allows existence without guaranteeing it. Because at the deepest level the universe is not fragile, it is simply uninsured. By the time we reach this point, the universe has been stripped of everything that once felt essential. Stars are gone, matter has thinned, space expands without interaction, even the vacuum itself is no longer guaranteed. And yet, one fact remains unavoidable. At some point existence happened, not gradually, not cautiously, but decisively. The universe did not ease into being. It appeared with conditions already set. This raises the final physical question, not philosophical, not emotional, but structural. Why was existence ever permitted at all? The universe did not need a reason. Physics does not describe the universe as something that needed to exist. There is no equation that demands reality. Instead, physics describes how things behave if they exist. This is a subtle but critical distinction. The laws of physics are conditional statements. If energy exists, it behaves this way. If space-time exists, it curves this way. If particles exist, they interact this way. Nowhere do the laws insist that existence must occur. Existence is not enforced, it is allowed. The minimal condition for being at the deepest level, physics describes reality in terms of fields and symmetries. The simplest possible state is not nothing. It is a state with structure so minimal that no objects, particles, or time-like processes can emerge. But even this minimal state still obeys rules, and rules imply possibility. If a rule allows a fluctuation, then fluctuation does not require intent. It requires permission. The universe may exist because non-existence is not enforced. Why nothing is not stable. One of the most counterintuitive results of modern physics is that absolute nothingness is unstable. A state with no fields, no energy, no space, and no time is not something physics knows how to define consistently. Instead, the lowest energy state still contains structure. Quantum fields cannot be turned off. They either exist or the concept of physics itself dissolves. This suggests that nothing is not a natural resting point. Existence may not be inevitable, but complete absence is not preferred either. Existence is a neutral outcome. If existence is allowed but not required, then the universe's presence is not a triumph or an accident. It is a neutral outcome of permissive rules. Much like a metastable vacuum allows persistence until it doesn't, the universe may allow existence without endorsing it. This reframes the entire narrative. The universe does not want to exist. It simply does, until it doesn't. Why time started moving. Time is often treated as something that began with the universe, but physics treats time differently. Time is not a background river flowing independently. It is a property of systems that change. When the universe began in a hot, dense state, change was unavoidable. Energy gradients were extreme, expansion was rapid, interactions were constant. Time emerged not as a decision, but as a consequence of conditions that demanded evolution. As long as those conditions existed, time had direction. When they fade, time loses meaning, but it does not disappear. The early universe was not designed. The early universe was chaotic, violent, and unstable. Particles formed and annihilated. Forces separated. Symmetries broke. Nothing about this suggests design or optimization. Instead, it suggests a system relaxing into allowed configurations. Existence did not begin cleanly. It began turbulently. This is important. A universe that begins in turbulence is not aiming for stability. Stability is temporary. Why complexity appeared, complexity was not guaranteed either. Stars, galaxies, chemistry, and life required extremely specific conditions. Slight changes in constants would have prevented them. But again, physics does not frame this as purpose. Complexity appeared because the rules allowed it under certain conditions. When those conditions disappear, complexity disappears too. Nothing breaks. Permission simply expires. Existence without investment. The universe never invested in its own continuation. There is no mechanism that reinforces its existence once it begins. Expansion dilutes matter. Entropy smooths gradients. Stability erodes. Physics does not preserve. It evolves. This is why the universe feels indifferent rather than hostile. Hostility requires resistance. The universe does not resist its own end. The role of observation observers are not central to this story. The universe existed long before observers emerged, and it will exist long after they are gone. Observation does not stabilize reality. It does not protect it. It is simply one of many processes that occurred while conditions allowed. Why existence is temporary by default in physics, permanence must be enforced. Without enforcement, systems change. Without constraints, states transition. The universe does not contain a rule that enforces eternal existence. Therefore, non-eternity is the default. This does not imply fragility. It implies openness. Open systems do not guarantee duration. Existence is a phase, not a state, seen this way. Existence is not a binary. It is a phase, a configuration of fields and space-time that persists while conditions allow. Just like stars were a phase, just like matter was a phase, just like complexity was a phase. The universe itself may be a phase. Why this is not meaningless? It is tempting to conclude that if existence is temporary, it is meaningless. Physics does not support this conclusion. Meaning is not a fundamental quantity. It does not appear in equations. Meaning arises locally within systems that process information. It does not require eternity. It requires occurrence. The universe does not justify itself. There is no final explanation that validates existence. Physics does not answer why there is something rather than nothing. It only shows that if something exists, it behaves consistently. The absence of justification is not a flaw. It is a feature of a system that does not narrate itself. What remains after this question? Once you accept that existence was allowed rather than required, a quiet clarity appears. You stop asking the universe to explain itself. You stop expecting permanence. You stop treating continuation as a promise. You see existence as something that happens, not something that must. Where this leaves us, at this point, the universe has no obligations left. Not to continue, not to explain, not to warn, and yet it exists. For now, In the next part, we will step back from physics itself and look at what remains when expectation dissolves, not as philosophy, but as alignment with how reality actually operates. Because understanding the universe's future ultimately reshapes how the present is perceived, and that change is quieter than any cosmic ending. By now, the universe no longer feels like a structure moving toward a destination. It feels like a condition. Stars existed while conditions allowed fusion. Matter existed while particles remained stable. Space behaves as it does while its vacuum configuration holds. Nothing here is promised, and yet everything that happens is real while it happens. This is the final adjustment physics invites, not an emotional one, but a structural one. Condition replaces certainty. For most of history, certainty was assumed. The sun would rise, stars would shine, the universe would continue because it always had. Physics slowly removed that assumption, not with drama but with precision. It showed that continuation is not enforced. Stability is not guaranteed. Existence persists only while conditions permit it. This does not make reality fragile, it makes it honest. Why this changes nothing and everything? At first glance, this understanding seems irrelevant to daily existence. The universe will not end tomorrow because you understand vacuum decay. Stars will not vanish because physics allows instability. Nothing immediate changes, and yet something fundamental shifts. You stop borrowing meaning from the future. You stop treating tomorrow as a validation of today. You recognize that continuation was never a reward. It was a condition, the illusion of safety. Safety is not a physical concept. Physics does not contain safety. It contains stability ranges, probabilities, and allowed states. When those states change, safety disappears without ceremony. This was always true. The only illusion was believing otherwise. Existence without narrative protection. Stories protect us. They promise arcs, resolutions, lessons. The universe does not participate in narrative. It does not foreshadow. It does not climax. It does not conclude. It transitions. Once this is accepted, the fear of no warning dissolves. Warning is a narrative concept. Physics does not warn. Meaning without endorsement. One of the last assumptions to fall is the idea that meaning requires endorsement, that something must last, be remembered, or lead somewhere to matter. Physics does not support this idea. A process does not need eternity to be real. A moment does not need repetition to count. Meaning occurs locally within systems capable of registering it. It does not require the universe's permission beyond existence itself. Why this is not nihilism? Nihilism claims nothing matters. Physics makes no such claim. Physics is silent on meaning. Silence is not denial. It simply means meaning is not a fundamental property like mass or charge. It emerges where conditions allow complexity. When conditions fade, meaning fades too, without judgment. Living without guarantees, once guarantees are removed, behavior changes. Not outwardly, but internally. You stop asking, will this last? You stop asking, is this safe forever? You stop asking, what does this lead to? You begin asking, what is allowed now? That question has answers. Presence replaces projection. Projection looks forward. It imagines futures, stability, continuation. Presence looks at what exists. Presence does not require belief in tomorrow. It only requires recognition of now. Physics does not reward optimism or pessimism. It rewards alignment. The universe is not watching this is another quiet relief. The universe is not watching outcomes. It is not evaluating choices. It is not tallying success or failure. It does not punish misunderstanding. It does not reward accuracy. It simply behaves. And you exist within that behavior. The scale of indifference, cosmic indifference, is often mistaken for hostility. They are not the same. Hostility implies intent. Indifference implies neutrality. The universe does not oppose existence. It does not support it either. It allows states. That is all. Why fear shrinks here? Fear depends on expectation. You fear loss because you expect preservation. You fear endings because you expect continuation. When expectation dissolves, fear loses leverage, not because danger disappears, but because danger was never personal. Time as permission time is no longer a countdown. It is permission extended moment by moment. Each moment exists because conditions allow it. Nothing more is promised. Nothing less is required. What physics ultimately teaches, physics does not teach reassurance. It teaches structure. It shows how systems behave without reference to meaning, desire, or outcome. When applied honestly, this knowledge does not flatten experience. It sharpens it. The ordinary world revisited, after all the cosmic futures and ultimate endings, the ordinary world returns. Light still moves. Objects still exist. Thoughts still form. Nothing here depends on eternity, it depends on conditions. And conditions are present. No countdown, no crisis, the universe does not tick toward its end. There is no timer, each moment is independent. The future does not accumulate toward catastrophe. It remains open, uncommitted. Acceptance without surrender. Acceptance here is not surrender, it is clarity. You stop demanding that reality be different. You stop arguing with its structure. You move with what exists. The quiet outcome. When the universe stops promising tomorrow, nothing collapses. Life does not lose meaning. Experience does not evaporate. Only illusion leaves. What remains is participation. What comes next? In the next part, we will not look further into the future. There is nowhere left to go. Instead, we will look at what remains when everything unnecessary has been removed, not philosophically, but practically. Because the final outcome of understanding the universe's end is not despair, it is orientation, and orientation is enough. After everything has been reduced to conditions, something subtle changes in how the universe is understood. Not dramatically, not emotionally, quietly. The universe no longer appears as a structure moving toward a future. It appears as a system that permits states for as long as they are permitted. Nothing more is implied. This is not a conclusion. It is a clarification. The end of expectation. Expectation was never a physical property. It was a habit. You expected stars to continue because they had continued. You expected matter to persist because it had persisted. You expected reality itself to be stable because it felt stable. Physics never supported these expectations. It tolerated them. Now, with everything stripped away, expectation dissolves. What remains is description. Reality without guarantees. When guarantees disappear, nothing breaks. Systems continue to operate exactly as they did before. Particles still behave according to their rules. Space still expands. Time still passes. The only difference is interpretive. You no longer treat persistence as evidence of obligation. You treat it as allowance. Allowance is not fragility. It is easy to confuse allowance with weakness, but allowed states can be extremely robust. Stars burned for billions of years. Matter held together across cosmic time. Space maintained consistent structure over unimaginable scales. Allowance does not mean instability, it means conditionality. Conditional systems can persist for vast durations without being guaranteed. The illusion of the future. The future was never something the universe prepared. It was something you inferred. Physics does not encode a future state toward which reality must move. It encodes rules for what happens if certain conditions are met. The future exists only as a set of possible continuations, not as a destination. Why loss stops feeling personal? Once expectation dissolves, loss changes character. Loss no longer feels like something taken away. It feels like a state that is no longer permitted. Stars did not betray the universe by dying. Matter did not fail by decaying. Space would not betray existence if it changed configuration. No promise was broken. The difference between endings and boundaries. An ending implies narrative, a boundary implies structure. Physics operates with boundaries. Fusion ends when fuel ends. Structure ends when energy gradients disappear. Complexity ends when interaction becomes impossible. These are not conclusions, they are limits. The silence of the universe revisited. Earlier, silence felt ominous. Now it feels appropriate. The universe does not speak because there is nothing to say. It does not warn because warning is not a physical process. It does not explain because explanation is not required for behavior. It is neutrality, existence without supervision. The universe does not supervise itself. There is no internal mechanism ensuring it remains interesting, complex, or stable. Existence is not maintained by effort. It is maintained by permission, and permission can persist without supervision. Why meaning does not collapse? There is a common fear that if nothing is promised, nothing matters. Physics does not support this fear. Meaning is not a global quantity. It does not require permanence. It arises locally within systems capable of registering difference. While such systems exist, meaning exists. When they do not, the question ends with them. No evaluation is required. The last misunderstanding. The final misunderstanding is subtle. It is the belief that understanding conditional existence should feel like something, that it should produce calm, fear, relief, or despair. Physics does not prescribe emotional outcomes, it prescribes structure. Any emotional response is secondary, stability without reassurance. Once reassurance is removed, stability remains, but without interpretation. Stars burned without knowing they would burn tomorrow. Particles interact without assuming future interactions. Reality operates without self-reflection. It does not need reassurance. The universe is not waiting. The universe is not waiting for the end. It is not approaching anything. Each moment stands alone, connected by continuity, not direction. This removes urgency. Not because time stops, but because time is no longer a countdown. Existence as a present condition. Existence is not a plan. It is a condition that holds now, and now is sufficient. This does not require optimism. It does not require hope. It requires accuracy. Why this is the quietest point at this stage. Nothing new needs to be added. The universe has been described down to its final permissions. There is nothing left to anticipate, nothing left to protect, nothing left to justify. What remains is orientation. You understand the universe does not promise continuation. You understand stability is conditional. You understand silence is not threat. This understanding does not demand action. It removes confusion. The shape of what is left is not belief, not certainty, not fear. It is participation without expectation, existence without projection, reality without narrative overlay. The final stillness before the end. If the universe were to end without warning, there would be no moment of realization, no awareness of loss, no experience of ending. The final state would simply not include experience, and until that state arrives, experience exists, fully. Why this is enough? This is enough. Not because it is comforting, but because it is correct. Correctness does not need completion. It needs coherence, and coherence is present. What comes after there is only one final movement left, not into the future, but into acceptance without conclusion. In the final part, we will not add new ideas. We will simply let everything settle into the shape it already has, because nothing more is required. There is nothing left to uncover now. No hidden mechanism waiting to be revealed. No final equation that resolves everything. No deeper layer that suddenly explains why the universe behaves as it does. What remains is not mystery, but familiarity. By this point, the idea that the universe can end without warning no longer feels shocking. It feels consistent. It fits everything physics has shown so far. The universe has never promised continuity. It has never guaranteed stability. It has never indicated that existence must persist. Those expectations were always external. When understanding stops seeking closure, most understanding seeks closure, a conclusion, a final answer, a point where curiosity rests. Physics does not offer this. It replaces closure with alignment. You stop asking the universe to resolve itself. You stop waiting for reassurance that things will continue. You recognize that explanation does not create guarantees. And in that recognition, something loosens. The need for final answers fades. Not because questions disappear, but because answers are no longer required to proceed. Acceptance without resolution. Acceptance here is not resignation. Resignation implies something was owed and withheld. Nothing was owed. Acceptance is simply the recognition of how systems actually behave. Stars burn until they cannot. Matter persists until it does not. Space remains as it is while its configuration holds. This is not failure, it is structure. The difference between fragility and uncertainty. Fragility implies weakness. The universe is not weak. It sustained complexity for billions of years. It allowed galaxies, stars, chemistry, and life to exist at all. Uncertainty is not fragility, it is openness. An open system does not enforce permanence. It allows transitions. The universe is open all the way down. Why this does not diminish existence? It is tempting to think that if nothing is promised, then existence is diminished. But promise was never part of existence. Existence does not borrow value from the future. It does not require continuation to be valid. A moment is complete while it occurs. That completeness is not revoked by what follows, or by what does not. The end of negotiation with reality. Earlier, there was negotiation. If I understand enough, maybe stability follows. If physics explains it, maybe safety exists. This negotiation was never mutual. Reality does not respond to understanding with guarantees. Once this is accepted, the negotiation ends. Not with defeat, with clarity. The universe is not a moral system. Physics does not encode justice, fairness, or reward. Stars do not earn longevity. Matter does not deserve stability. The vacuum does not commit to its state. Outcomes are not judgments. They are consequences of structure. This removes a hidden pressure. You stop treating the future as a verdict on the present. Time without urgency, time continues. But it no longer feels like something running out. There is no universal clock ticking toward a final event. Each moment exists independently, connected by continuity, not obligation. Urgency dissolves when you stop expecting time to lead somewhere. The ordinary world returns after all the cosmic futures and ultimate limits. The ordinary world reasserts itself. Objects exist, processes occur, thoughts form. Nothing here depends on eternity. It depends on conditions, and conditions are present. This is enough for reality to function. Why silence no longer feels threatening. Earlier, the silence of the universe felt ominous. It felt like withholding. Now it feels neutral. The universe does not speak because it has no voice. It does not warn because warning is not part of its operation. Silence is not concealment. It is simply absence of narrative. The final fear dissolves. The deepest fear was never destruction. It was invalidation. The fear that an unannounced ending would retroactively erase meaning. Physics does not support this fear. Erasure requires a perspective from which something is declared meaningless. There is no such perspective. Meaning exists where experience exists. When experience ends, the question ends with it. Nothing is judged void. What remains is not emptiness. What remains is orientation. You know how reality behaves. You know what it does not promise. You know what it allows. This knowledge does not demand belief or faith. It requires alignment. Alignment with conditional reality. Alignment means acting within conditions rather than against imagined guarantees. You plan without assuming inevitability. You care without requiring permanence. You engage without demanding validation. This is not detachment. it is precision. The universe does not need to conclude stories conclude. Systems do not. The universe does not need an ending that explains it. It does not need closure. It does not need to make sense in narrative terms. It operates. And when it cannot, it stops. Nothing more is required. The quiet strength of this understanding. This understanding is quiet because it removes drama. But there is no countdown, no final reveal, no hidden threat, just a system that behaves consistently until it does not. This consistency is not comforting, but it is stable in a deeper way. It does not lie what acceptance really is. Acceptance is not approval. It is not agreement. It is accurate recognition. You recognize that existence is conditional. You recognize that continuation is not promised. You recognize that warning is not guaranteed. And you live within that recognition. Why this is the end of the journey, there is nowhere else to go. Not because everything is known, but because nothing else is required. The universe has been followed to its furthest physical permissions. Beyond this point, only repetition remains, the final shape. The universe exists without promising tomorrow. It allows moments without guaranteeing the next. It does not announce endings. It does not narrate itself. And yet, while it exists, it is complete, the last stillness. If the universe were to end without warning, there would be no moment of awareness, no realization of loss, no experience of ending. Until that happens, experience exists, fully, without needing justification. This is the quiet acceptance. Not peace, not despair, just clarity. The universe does not promise tomorrow, and it never needed to. Existence was never a contract, it was permission, moment by moment. While it holds, after everything has been stripped away, stars, matter, guarantees, even expectation, something unexpected happens. The universe does not feel distant anymore. It feels ordinary. Not smaller, not less meaningful, just unadorned. This is where understanding settles, not as a revelation, but as a background condition. You no longer actively think about cosmic endings or ultimate limits. They stop demanding attention. Life does not become dramatic, it becomes accurate. Nothing has changed, and that is the point. The most unsettling realization is also the calmest one. Nothing in your immediate experience changes when you understand that the universe does not promise continuation. Light still behaves the same way. Objects still persist. Time still seems to flow. The world does not react to your knowledge, and that is precisely why the knowledge matters. Reality was never structured around reassurance. It functioned without it. How stability was misunderstood. For a long time, stability felt like a property. Stars were stable, matter was stable. Space felt stable. Now it is clear that stability was always a condition, not a guarantee. A temporary alignment of factors that happen to last a long time. This reframes how you look at everything that appears permanent. Buildings, mountains, planets, even physical laws. They persist while they are permitted. That permission does not announce itself. It simply holds. Expectation is the hidden source of anxiety. Much of the unease people feel about cosmic endings does not come from danger. It comes from expectation. You expected warning. You expected gradual failure. You expected signs. Physics does not support these expectations. Once expectation is removed, anxiety loses its footing, not because uncertainty disappears, but because uncertainty was never personal. The ordinary is no longer borrowed from the future. Earlier ordinary moments were often justified by what came next. This matters because it leads somewhere. This is valuable because it lasts. This counts because it will be remembered. Now that structure dissolves. Moments no longer borrow meaning from the future. They carry it locally. A sound matters while it is heard. A thought matters while it is formed. A choice matters while it shapes conditions. Nothing else is required. Time without pressure. Time continues, but it no longer presses forward like a demand. It stops feeling like something you must outrun or fill. Without a promised future, time becomes what it always was, a sequence of allowed states, each moment complete, not leading, just occurring. The absence of cosmic judgment, another subtle relief appears here. The universe is not judging outcomes. It is not evaluating how things ended. It is not comparing what was achieved to what was possible. There is no cosmic scorekeeping. Physics does not record success or failure. It records transitions. This removes a quiet burden that was never justified. Why loss changes shape? Loss does not disappear, but it changes character. Instead of feeling like something that should not have happened, loss is recognized as a condition that no longer holds. A relationship ends because conditions change. A structure fails because forces shift. A system dissolves because gradients vanish. Nothing was stolen, nothing was betrayed. Permission expired. The end of the question, why me? Once conditionality is understood, personal framing dissolves. Events are not directed. Outcomes are not assigned. Stability is not distributed based on worth. The universe does not choose targets, it allows states. This removes the last trace of cosmic personalization. Why silence is finally neutral? Earlier, silence felt ominous, like something withheld. Now silence feels appropriate. The universe does not speak because it does not communicate intention. It does not warn because warning implies foresight. Silence is not absence of care. It is absence of narrative, understanding without emotional demand. This understanding does not demand a specific emotional response. You do not need to feel calm. You do not need to feel disturbed. You do not need to feel enlightened. Physics does not prescribe feeling. It describes structure. Any emotional alignment that follows is secondary. The return of the everyday after tracing the universe to its furthest future, attention returns to the immediate, objects on a table, light through a window. None of this depends on eternity. It depends on now, and now is permitted. Why this is not small, recognizing the ordinary as sufficient is not reduction. It is precision. You stop inflating moments with imagined futures. You stop diminishing them because they won't last. You allow them to be exactly what they are, complete. The last illusion to dissolve there is one illusion that lingers longest. The idea that understanding should complete something, that once you know how things end, you should feel finished. Physics does not offer completion, it offers alignment. Alignment does not conclude, it stabilizes. Existence without reinforcement, nothing reinforces existence from the outside. There is no safety mechanism, no feedback loop that ensures continuation. Existence persists because conditions allow it. That has always been enough. The quiet confidence of accuracy. There is a quiet confidence that comes from accuracy, not confidence that things will last. Confidence that things are understood as they are. Accuracy does not protect, it clarifies. No countdown, no anticipation. The universe is not counting down to its end. There is no accumulating risk. Each moment stands alone. The future does not gather weight, it remains uncommitted. What it means to be here is not to be safe. It is not to be guaranteed. It is to be permitted, and permission is enough for experience to exist fully. Why nothing more is needed? At this point, nothing more needs to be added. No new theory resolves this. No new discovery changes the structure. The universe does not require closure. The shape of the remaining world. What remains is a world without borrowed meaning, without cosmic expectation, without narrative pressure, just a system that behaves. And you within it, the quiet continuation. If the universe continues, it does so without promise. If it ends, it does so without warning. Neither outcome invalidates what exists now. This is the ordinary world, seen clearly, not dramatic, not diminished, not secured, just present. And that presence is complete. While it holds, even now after everything has been clarified, one habit quietly remains. It is not fear, it is not hope, it is not the desire for answers, It is the habit of waiting, waiting for understanding to finish, waiting for reality to settle into something final, waiting for a moment when nothing more needs to be adjusted. Physics does not offer that moment. Reality does not arrive at a completed state. It only continues until it doesn't. Why understanding never concludes? There is a deep expectation that understanding should bring closure. That once the universe has been traced from its beginning to its farthest possible end, the mind should come to rest. But physics does not move toward rest. It moves toward description, and description does not conclude. It stabilizes. You do not arrive at a final answer. You arrive at a posture, a way of standing inside uncertainty without leaning on imagined supports. Acceptance is not a destination. Acceptance is often mistaken for an endpoint, as if once acceptance is reached, no further adjustment is required. In reality, acceptance is ongoing. Each time something changes, each time stability dissolves, each time continuation proves conditional again, acceptance reappears, not as surrender, as alignment. The habit of waiting for later. One of the hardest habits to release is the idea of later. Later things will make sense. Later stability will return. Later the universe will reveal something final. Later is a projection of permanence. It assumes time exists in order to deliver reassurance. Physics does not support this assumption. Time exists because change exists. When change fades, time loses urgency. Why completion was never required. There is no requirement that understanding feel complete. That requirement came from narrative thinking. Stories need endings. Stories need resolution. Systems do not. The universe is not obligated to provide a sense of completion. It simply behaves. The subtle pressure to extract meaning. Another habit lingers quietly, the pressure to extract meaning from everything, to ensure that every process, every loss, every ending contributes to a larger explanation. Physics does not operate this way. It does not justify transitions. It describes them. Meaning arises where systems process information. When they stop, meaning stops with them. No evaluation is left undone. Letting go of cosmic expectation was never supported by structure. It was supported by comfort, the comfort of assuming tomorrow would resemble today. The comfort of assuming stability would continue because it had. Letting go of expectation does not make the world colder, it makes it accurate. Why this is not emotional detachment? Releasing expectation is not emotional withdrawal. It does not remove care. It removes conditions placed on care. You no longer care because something will last. You care because caring occurs. That is simpler and stronger. The last role of fear. Fear relied on expectation. You feared loss because you expected preservation. You feared endings because you expected warning. Once expectation dissolves, fear loses its structure. Not because danger vanishes, but because danger was never personal. Living without narrative reinforcement. The universe does not reinforce meaning. It does not confirm significance. It does not provide feedback. Living within it requires a shift. You stop asking reality to agree with you. You stop seeking validation from continuation. You stop interpreting stability as endorsement. Why this is quiet, not grand. There is no dramatic revelation here, no emotional climax. No final image that resolves everything. This understanding is quiet because it removes excess. Drama requires conflict. Conflict required expectation. Expectation is gone. The ordinary world, again once more. Attention returns to what is immediately present. Movement, sound, light. Nothing here depends on cosmic outcomes. Nothing here requires the universe to last forever. It requires only this moment. The end of the need to finish. There is no need to finish understanding. There is no final mental state to reach. Understanding continues as long as there is something to understand. And when there is not, understanding does not protest. Why? This is stability of a different kind. This is not stability guaranteed by permanence. It is stability produced by accuracy. Accuracy does not collapse when things change. It adjusts. The universe does not pause for comprehension. The universe does not wait for understanding to catch up. It does not slow transitions until they're emotionally processed. It behaves. Understanding follows when possible and stops when it cannot. The final release is not letting go of fear. It is letting go of the need for finality. Once finality is no longer expected, nothing feels unfinished. Existence without closure. Existence does not need closure to be valid. It does not need explanation to continue. It does not need justification to occur. It simply happens while it is allowed. What remains now, what remains is not belief, not certainty, not reassurance. It is orientation without demand. Why this is enough, not because it comforts, but because it matches how reality actually functions. Reality does not promise, it does not conclude, it allows. The last stillness. If the universe continues, it does so without commitment. If it ends, it does so without announcement. Neither outcome leaves anything unresolved. This is the last habit to let go, the habit of waiting for the universe to finish speaking. It never started. And that is not a problem. It is the final clarity. Existence does not explain itself. It does not need to. It happens while it holds. There comes a point where even orientation stops feeling new, not because it has faded, but because it has settled into habit. You no longer actively remind yourself that existence is conditional. You no longer rehearse the idea that the universe does not promise continuation. You simply move as if this is true. And that is the final shift. Understanding stops being something you hold in mind. It becomes something you stand inside. At this stage, the universe no longer feels like a question, not because it has been answered, but because questions have lost their urgency. The universe behaves. That behavior is consistent, and consistency, even without guarantees, is enough to orient action. This is where participation replaces interpretation. You no longer relate to reality as something that must justify itself to you. You relate to it as something you are already inside of. You do not wait for permission to engage. Engagement is already happening. You are not observing existence from a distance. You are participating in it by default. Participation does not require belief. It does not require optimism. It does not require confidence in the future. It only requires that conditions allow interaction. And as long as conditions allow interaction, participation is unavoidable. This is not a philosophical claim, it is a physical one. As long as particles interact, something happens. As long as something happens, states change. As long as states change, time has meaning. And as long as time has meaning, participation is occurring. There is no opt-out. Earlier, the idea that the universe could end without warning felt destabilizing because it seemed to undermine the value of participation. Why engage if nothing is promised? Why care if there is no guarantee of continuation? This question dissolves once participation is understood correctly. Participation was never a strategy for securing the future. It was never an investment in permanence. It was simply what happens when systems interact under allowed conditions. You do not participate because it will last. You participate because participation is already underway. This reframes effort. Effort no longer aims at permanence, it aims at fit. You act in ways that align with the current configuration of reality. You build what can be built now, you understand what can be understood now. You respond to what exists now. There is no requirement that these actions endure indefinitely. Their validity does not depend on longevity. It depends on coherence with present conditions. This is a quieter standard than success or failure, but it is more precise. Success implied reaching a stable outcome. Failure implied falling short of one. In a conditional universe, outcomes are not guaranteed. Measuring action against permanence was always mismatched. Fit replaces success. Misalignment replaces failure. This shift removes a great deal of unnecessary pressure. You no longer ask whether something will matter in the long run. The long run is not a physical entity, it is an abstraction. You ask whether something matters now, under these conditions. That question has an answer. Participation also reframes responsibility. Responsibility no longer extends to outcomes that require guarantees. You are responsible for how you act within the conditions that exist, not for whether those conditions persist. You did not create the rules of the universe, you operate within them. This does not reduce responsibility, it localizes it. Local responsibility is actionable. Global responsibility toward an unguaranteed future was always speculative. Once responsibility is localized, regret changes shape. Regret often depends on imagined futures that never materialized. If only things had lasted longer. If only conditions had held. But conditions were never promised. You did not misuse permanence. Permanence was not available. This does not erase loss. It removes misplaced blame. Loss is not evidence that something failed. It is evidence that conditions changed. Change is not an error. It is the default behavior of systems without enforced stability. Participation continues through change, not despite it. Now, consider attention. Earlier, attention was split between the present and an imagined future. What will this lead to? Will this last? Does this secure something? These questions pulled attention away from what was actually happening. In a conditional universe, attention consolidates. You attend to what exists, not because you force yourself to be present, but because there is nothing else to negotiate with. The universe is not listening for requests, it is behaving. When negotiation ends, attention returns. This does not make life intense or dramatic, it makes it accurate. Accuracy is often mistaken for detachment. It is not detachment, it is the absence of distortion. Distortion came from expecting guarantees that were never part of the system. Once distortion is removed, engagement becomes simpler. You do not wait for certainty. Certainty is not a prerequisite for participation. It never was. You do not postpone action until safety is assured. Safety is not a physical constant. You act because action is permitted. This is not recklessness. Recklessness ignores conditions. Participation responds to them. The universe is not watching. It is not evaluating choices. It is not recording whether you engaged correctly. Participation does not need supervision. It is not a performance. This removes the last trace of cosmic audience. There is no need to be seen by the universe. There is no need to be validated by outcomes. There is no need to be justified by endurance. Participation does not aim to be remembered. Memory is a local phenomenon. It exists while systems capable of memory exist. When they do not, the requirement dissolves. This does not trivialize experience. It clarifies its scope. Experience does not need to echo forever to be complete. A sound does not need to repeat to be real. A moment does not need to be preserved to matter. It matters while it occurs. This is the deepest implication of a universe that can end without warning. An unannounced ending does not invalidate what preceded it. Invalidation requires a perspective from which value is assessed. If experience ends, the perspective ends with it. There is no external frame that declares participation meaningless. Meaning is not retroactive, it is local. Participation is not justified by the future, it is justified by occurrence. This removes the fear that everything is provisional in a way that cheapens it. Provisional does not mean insignificant. It means unguaranteed. Those are different. Unsecured systems can be precise. They can be coherent. They can be fully real. They simply do not carry insurance. The universe is uninsured, and yet it functions. This is not a flaw. It is the structure. Now notice how ordinary everything becomes again. After tracing cosmic futures, vacuum decay, and the end of matter, the ordinary world returns unchanged. Objects persist, light propagates, fault occurs. None of this depends on promises. Participation happens at this scale too. You interact with objects because interaction is allowed. You think because neural processes are active. You notice because noticing occurs. There is no deeper requirement. This is not a diminished view of life. It is a grounded one. Life was never protected by the universe. It was permitted by it. Permission is extended moment by moment, not guaranteed in advance, not renewed by agreement, simply present until it is not. This is why there is no countdown. The universe does not accumulate toward an ending. It does not approach termination as a goal. Each moment stands independently, connected by continuity, not by direction. If the universe ends, it does not complete a trajectory, it simply ceases to permit the next state. Until then, states occur. Participation is simply being one of those states. There is no need to dramatize this. Drama requires expectation. Expectation has been removed. What remains is quieter. You are not bracing for the end. You are not preparing for permanence. You are not suspended between hope and fear. You are participating. That participation does not need to be framed as meaningful or meaningless. Those are interpretive layers added afterward. Participation precedes interpretation. The universe does not explain itself. It does not conclude. It does not promise. And yet, while it exists, it is complete. Not complete as a story, complete as a state. This is the final shape, not closure, not resolution, not reassurance, just participation inside a system that behaves while it holds. There is one final adjustment that happens after everything else has settled. It is not intellectual and it is not emotional. It is structural. It is the moment when even participation stops feeling like a response to understanding and becomes indistinguishable from existence itself. You no longer think of yourself as participating in the universe. You simply recognize that participation was never optional. Existence is participation. From the beginning, this was always the case. Particles did not choose to interact. Fields did not decide to fluctuate. Space did not elect to expand. These things happened because the conditions allowed them to happen. Choice, intention, and meaning were layers that appeared much later, built on top of this deeper fact. The universe does not distinguish between acting and being. To exist is to take part in ongoing processes. There is no passive mode. Once this is understood, the idea of stepping back from reality loses coherence. There is nowhere to step back to. There is no vantage point outside the system from which observation could occur without participation. Even observation is interaction. Even stillness is a state within motion. This realization dissolves the last trace of distance between you and the universe, not symbolically, physically. You are not inside the universe as an object inside a container. You are a configuration of the same fields, forces, and particles that make up everything else. The boundary between observer and observed was always practical, never fundamental. This is why the universe never felt obligated to explain itself to you. You were never separate from it. Earlier, there was a subtle sense that understanding the universe's end placed you in a position of watching it from afar, as if you were tracing a story that might one day conclude. Now even that framing dissolves. There is no story being told to someone, there is only a system unfolding, and you are part of that unfolding. This is not a comforting thought. Comfort implies reassurance. Reassurance implies promise. None of that applies here. But it is stabilizing in a deeper sense. It removes the illusion that existence is something you must manage, secure, or justify. You do not hold reality together by understanding it. You do not keep it alive by caring about it. Reality does not depend on awareness to continue, and awareness does not depend on reality to make sense. They arise together under the same conditions. This is the last quiet condition, the condition that there is no external support structure beneath existence. No hidden framework guaranteeing continuation, no deeper layer that steps in when everything else dissolves. There is only what is allowed now, and now is always sufficient for what exists in it. At this point, the fear of an ending without warning has lost its context. Fear depended on imagining yourself as someone who would be present to witness the loss. But the loss of existence includes the loss of witnessing. There is no stranded observer left behind. This does not trivialize endings, it places them correctly. An ending without warning is not an experience. It is the absence of experience. Experience cannot register its own absence. This is not something to accept emotionally. It is something to recognize structurally. Once recognized, the emotional charge drains away, not because the idea becomes pleasant, but because it no longer misrepresents anything. The universe is not fragile in the way a story is fragile. Stories require continuation to make sense. Systems do not. A system can end without invalidating what occurred within it. The universe does not owe its past a future. This is one of the hardest ideas to fully release, because it runs against almost every instinct shaped by narrative thinking. Instincts want payoff. They want resolution. They want confirmation that what happened was worth happening. Physics offers no such confirmation, but it also offers no negation. Worth is not a global property. It is not assessed from the outside. It exists where processes register difference. Where there is no process capable of registering difference, the concept of worth does not apply. Nothing is judged lacking. Nothing is judged complete. Judgment itself is local. This brings the entire arc to a quiet equilibrium. There is no final warning to wait for, no ultimate lesson to extract, no posture to maintain. You are not meant to hold this understanding tightly. It holds itself. Once you see that existence does not justify itself, you stop asking it to. Once you see that continuation is not promised, you stop treating its absence as betrayal. Once you see that participation is unavoidable, you stop framing it as a decision. The universe does not ask you to believe in it. It does not ask you to fear it. It does not ask you to affirm or deny anything. It simply behaves, and you behave within it. This is the final reduction. Not to nothing, to sufficiency. Sufficiency does not mean abundance. It does not mean safety. It does not mean permanence. It means that what exists does not require reinforcement from what does not. This moment does not need the next one to be valid. This state does not need to persist to be real. This participation does not need to be remembered to have occurred. Everything that happens is complete, at the scale at which it happens. That scale is always now. Now is not a bridge to the future. It is not a checkpoint on the way to an ending. It is not a temporary placeholder. It is the only place where existence ever occurs. The universe has always operated this way. The only change is that you are no longer projecting expectations onto it. Expectation was the distortion. Without it, reality appears neither threatening nor reassuring. It appears accurate. Accuracy does not excite. It does not console. It steadies. There is no final image to hold on to here. No sentence that closes the loop. No conclusion that transforms everything. Because transformation was never the point. Alignment was. And alignment does not announce itself. It simply feels like nothing is being resisted anymore. The universe may continue. It may not. Physics allows both. What physics does not do is wait, and neither does existence. It happens while it holds. That is the last quiet condition, and there is nothing beyond it that needs to be said. Part 15. The end without an ending. At this point, the idea of an ending has lost most of its weight, not because the universe is safe, not because continuation is assured, but because the word end no longer describes something that happens to reality. It describes a condition in which reality is no longer permitted to continue. This distinction matters. An ending, as it is usually imagined, as an event inside time, something that occurs, is noticed and is processed. But the kind of ending physics allows at the deepest level is not an event, it is the absence of the next event. Once this is understood, the need to imagine the end collapses. There is nothing to picture. No scene, no transition, no final frame. The universe does not end the way stories end. It does not arrive at a conclusion. It does not close a loop. It simply stops permitting states. And before that happens, states exist fully. This reframes everything that came before. The long future of dying stars, evaporating black holes, fading matter, expanding space, and unstable vacuum was never a countdown. It was a description of how conditions evolve when nothing enforces permanence. Nothing in that description implied urgency. Urgency was something added from the outside. Now that urgency is gone, the universe is not moving toward its end. It is moving through allowed configurations. Movement does not imply destination, it implies transition, and transition does not require completion. This is why the final understanding does not feel like closure. Closure implies something has been resolved. Nothing has been resolved. Nothing needed to be. The universe did not pose a question. It exhibited behavior. You followed that behavior as far as physics allows. There is no step beyond that. Not because knowledge ends, but because expectation ends. Expectation was the only thing making the future feel heavy. Once expectation dissolves, the future becomes light again, not hopeful, unburdened. Now consider how this changes the idea of finality. Finality suggests that something must be wrapped up, that loose ends must be tied, that meaning must be consolidated before disappearance. Physics does not recognize loose ends. It recognizes only what exists and what does not. Meaning does not need to be consolidated. It does not accumulate into a final verdict. It exists wherever experience exists. When experience ends, meaning does not fail. It simply ceases to be relevant. No judgment occurs. No audit is performed. No balance is calculated. The universe does not look back on itself. This removes the last trace of drama from the idea of the end. Drama required the universe to care about how things turned out. It does not. This does not make the universe cold. It makes it consistent. Consistency is the only form of stability physics actually provides, and consistency does not promise continuation. It only describes behavior while conditions hold. At this stage, even the idea of while it holds begins to soften. Holding is not effort. The universe does not strain to remain what it is. It does not resist change. It simply occupies a state until it does not. No tension is involved. Tension was introduced by expectation. Without expectation, there is nothing pulling against the present. The present does not need defense. It does not need explanation. It does not need justification. It simply exists. Now reflect on the full arc. The universe began in extreme conditions, expanded, cooled, formed structure, produced complexity, and gradually lost the conditions that allowed that complexity to persist. At no point did the universe signal intent. At no point did it aim for an outcome. It followed rules. Those rules allowed certain states. When the rules no longer allowed those states, they ended. This is not tragedy. Tragedy requires an alternative that should have happened. Physics does not recognize should. It recognizes allowed and forbidden. The universe did not fail to remain interesting. Interest is not a physical property. It remained exactly as structured as its rules permitted, nothing more. Nothing less. This is the end without an ending. Not because nothing remains, but because nothing requires conclusion. The absence of a final moment is not a deficiency. It is the logical outcome of a system that does not narrate itself. If the universe ends without warning, there is no unfinished business. There is no unresolved meaning. There is no audience left to feel loss. There is simply no next state. Until that happens, states exist. And those states are complete. This understanding does not ask you to feel anything in particular. It does not demand peace or acceptance. It does not ask you to let go of attachment. It simply removes a misconception, the misconception that reality owes itself a future. Once that misconception is gone, the end loses its power, not because it is impossible, but because it no longer misrepresents anything. You do not need to prepare for an ending that cannot be experienced. You do not need to protect meaning from a future that may never arrive. You do not need to justify participation with permanence. Participation was never provisional. It was always complete at the scale at which it occurred. This is the final clarity. The universe does not build toward a finale. It unfolds. And unfolding does not imply destination. It implies allowance. Allowance is extended moment by moment. Not accumulated, not banked, not promised, just present. The idea that something must last to be valid dissolves here completely. Duration is not validation. It is just duration. A long-lasting process is not more real than a short one. It is simply longer. Reality does not grade itself by longevity. It does not weigh outcomes. It does not compare states. Comparison is a local process. It exists only where systems can compare. When those systems are gone, comparison is gone with them. Nothing is left unevaluated. Nothing is left incomplete. This is the end without an ending. Not a collapse, not a climax, not a revelation, just the absence of further permission. And until that absence arrives, permission exists. That is the only structure physics provides. Everything else was narrative. Now that narrative has fallen away. What remains is not emptiness, it is sufficiency. Sufficiency does not reassure, it does not frighten, it does not explain, it simply matches how reality actually operates. The universe does not promise tomorrow, it never did, and yet today exists. Fully. That is not a paradox, it is the final form of accuracy. Nothing more needs to be said. Not because silence is profound, but because nothing is being withheld. The universe has always been exactly this honest. It was expectation that made it seem otherwise. Now, expectation is gone. And what remains is reality unadorned, existing until it doesn't, without warning, without regret, without the need for an ending at all. Part 16. When nothing needs to continue, there is a final subtle shift that happens when everything has been seen clearly and nothing new is being added. It is not a realization in the usual sense. It is the absence of something that used to be there, the sense that reality should continue. Not that it will continue, but that it should. That sense quietly dissolves. This does not produce despair. It produces neutrality. A neutrality that is not emotional but structural. The universe no longer feels like something leaning forward into the next moment. It feels like something fully contained in each moment it occupies. The future stops pulling on the present. For most of human experience, the present has been stretched thin between memory and anticipation. What just happened explains what is happening. What will happen gives meaning to what is happening. This tension created the sense that moments were incomplete on their own. Physics never supported this tension. It described continuity, not obligation. Once this distinction is internalized, the present thickens. Not emotionally, but structurally. It no longer needs to justify itself by what comes next. It stands alone, complete at its own scale. This is not mindfulness. It is not a practice. It is not an attitude. It is a recognition of how physical systems operate when nothing enforces continuation. A system does not continue because it ought to. It continues because the next state is allowed. If the next state is not allowed, there is no failure. There is no loss of momentum. There is simply no next state. This reframes the idea of interruption. An interruption implies something was meant to continue. Physics does not contain intention. Processes end because constraints change, not because trajectories are broken. Once this is seen, the idea that the universe could be interrupted loses coherence. There is nothing to interrupt. There is only permission that holds or does not. This makes the idea of a sudden end less dramatic, not more. Drama requires violation. There is no violation here. If the universe ends without warning, it is not cutting something short. It is reaching a boundary beyond which no further states are permitted. Boundaries do not apologize. They are simply where behavior stops. This is the last place where fear used to hide. Fear was attached to the idea of being cut off, of something being taken away mid-process. But nothing is taken away if there is no remaining state in which it could exist. Loss requires a continuing context. When context disappears, loss disappears with it. This is not a comforting thought. It is a precise one. Precision removes excess interpretation. Now consider how this applies to existence itself. Existence does not hold a reserve of future moments. It does not store tomorrow in advance. Each moment exists independently, conditioned by what exists now. The universe does not owe itself continuity, and neither do the systems within it. This does not mean systems are fleeting in a way that cheapens them. Many systems persist for immense durations. Stars burned for billions of years. Galaxies persisted across cosmic time. Matter endured long enough to form complexity. Duration happened. It was not promised. That distinction is everything. Once promise is removed, the pressure to secure the future dissolves. Not the desire to act, but the demand that action lead somewhere permanent. Action becomes local again. You act because action occurs under current conditions. You think because thought is possible. You care because caring happens. There is no added requirement that these states justify themselves beyond their occurrence. This removes a quiet exhaustion that often goes unnoticed, the exhaustion of constantly leaning forward, leaning into the future, leaning into explanation, leaning into reassurance. When leaning stops, nothing collapses. The present does not fall backward. It simply stands. Now the universe feels neither stable nor unstable. Those words depended on a reference point in time. Stability meant persisting across moments. Instability meant failing to do so. Without a promised future, those terms lose their edge. What exists, what does not exist does not. No additional judgment applies. This is why the universe does not feel hostile at this stage. Hostility requires opposition. There is no opposition here. The universe is not against continuation. It simply does not enforce it. Enforcement was always a projection. Once that projection dissolves, the universe appears quieter, not harsher. Quieter because nothing is being demanded of it anymore, and nothing is being demanded of you either. There is no obligation to make existence worthwhile by extending it. Worth was never a future condition. It was a local one. This brings a final kind of stillness. Not stillness as in immobility, stillness as in lack of pull. The present no longer feels like a stepping stone. It feels like a place. Not a place that must be held, just a place that is occupied while it exists. Now the idea of continuation feels optional in a way it never did before. Not optional in the sense that you choose whether the universe continues. Optional in the sense that continuation is no longer a requirement for coherence. The universe can stop and nothing becomes incoherent. Nothing retroactively loses validity. Nothing waits unfinished. This is the last conceptual knot to untangle, the belief that something must finish to be complete. Completion does not require duration. It requires presence. Process is complete at the scale at which it occurs. A moment is complete while it exists. A system is complete while its rules permit it. Completion is not something that arrives at the end, it is something that exists throughout. Once this is understood, the idea of an ultimate end fades into the background, not because it is impossible, but because it no longer threatens anything. An ending without warning does not undermine meaning. It simply ends the conditions under which meaning arises. And when those conditions end, the concept of meaning is no longer applicable. Nothing is judged void, nothing is declared wasted. The evaluation process ends with the system capable of evaluation. This is not nihilism. Nihilism asserts that nothing matters. Physics does not assert that. Physics is silent on what matters. Silence is not denial. It is absence of prescription. Prescription was never part of the system. Now reflect on the title that began this entire journey. An ending with no warning. At the beginning this sounded ominous. Now it sounds ordinary. Not because endings are ordinary events, but because the absence of warning is exactly what a system without narrative would produce. Warning was always a story device. The universe does not tell stories, it behaves. Behavior does not foreshadow itself, it simply occurs. This is not a flaw, it is consistency. Consistency without promise. The final understanding does not make you vigilant, it does not make you anxious, it does not make you detached. It makes you accurate. Accuracy is the quietest state. It does not shout, it does not persuade, it does not reassure. It simply aligns perception with structure. And once alignment occurs, nothing needs to be defended anymore. The present does not need protection from the future. The future does not need preparation. There is no preparation for the absence of experience. There is only experience while it exists. That is all physics ever described. Everything else was expectation layered on top. Now that expectation is gone, what remains is not emptiness. It is sufficiency without requirement. The universe exists while it exists. You exist while you exist. No guarantees bind either. No promises are broken. No warnings are required. This is not the end, because the end was never something that happened. It is simply the absence of what happens next. Until then, what happens now is complete. Nothing more is missing. Nothing more needs to continue. And that is the final quiet truth. Part 17. The silence that was always there by now. Even the idea of a final truth has softened. Not because it was false, but because it was never required. What remains is not an answer, but a recognition that was present from the beginning. Quietly overlooked while attention was fixed on motion, progress and outcome. Silence. Not silence as absence of sound, but silence as absence of demand. The universe was always silent in this way. It never instructed existence on how long to last. It never urged matter to hold together. It never encouraged stars to keep burning. It never pressured space to remain as it is. All of that pressure came later, introduced by minds that needed continuity to feel secure. Physics never added it. From the earliest moments after the universe began, there was no guarantee embedded in its structure. Expansion did not include a destination. Cooling did not include preservation. Formation did not include permanence. Silence was there from the start. It just went unnoticed while things were happening quickly. When energy was high, silence felt like activity. When structure was forming, silence felt like purpose. When complexity emerged, silence felt like meaning. But silence never changed. It did not grow quieter as the universe aged. It did not arrive at the end. It was always present, underneath everything, unnoticed because nothing required it to be heard. Only now, when expectation has fully dissolved, does that silence become visible, not threatening, not empty, just unoccupied, the silence of a system that does not argue with itself. This is why the universe never reacted to its own changes. It did not resist entropy. It did not mourn lost structure. It did not protect complexity. It did not intervene to preserve life. Intervention implies preference. Preference implies intent. Intent was never there. This does not make the universe hostile. Hostility implies opposition. Silence implies neutrality. Neutrality without commentary. The silence is not watching events unfold. It is not withholding response. It is not waiting for something to happen. It is not a pause before action. It is the absence of action at the deepest level. Action exists locally. Silence exists globally. Local processes arise, interact, dissolve. Silence remains unaffected. This is not metaphysical, it is physical. The laws of physics describe interactions. They do not describe intention. They do not describe obligation. They do not describe concern. They operate within silence. Silence is not something that arrives when the universe ends. It is something that was always there, surrounding every event. unnoticed while events were occurring. When the last star dies, silence does not appear. It is simply no longer interrupted by light. When matter decays, silence does not deepen. It is simply no longer shaped by structure. When space expands beyond interaction, silence does not spread. It was never confined. When the vacuum changes state, silence does not respond. There is nothing to respond with. Silence is not the opposite of existence. It is the condition in which existence occurs. This reframes the idea of an ending without warning one last time. An ending without warning is not abrupt. It is not sudden. It is not harsh. It is silent. Not silent in the sense of shock, silent in the sense of continuity without signal. There is no warning because there is no channel through which a warning could be meaningful. Warnings exist inside systems that anticipate. Anticipation requires preference for continuation. The universe does not anticipate itself. Silence is what remains when anticipation is absent. This does not strip the universe of depth. It reveals its depth. Depth without intention, depth without narrative, depth without demand. This is the final form of clarity, not insight, not revelation, just absence of distortion. Now consider how this silence changes the way existence feels. Existence no longer feels like something upheld against resistance. It feels like something occurring without commentary. You do not feel watched. You do not feel evaluated. You do not feel hurried, you do not feel delayed. Those feelings belong to expectation. Without expectation, silence feels neutral. Neutrality is not emptiness, it is openness without direction. Silence does not tell you what to do. It does not encourage or discourage. It does not guide or obstruct. It simply allows. Allowance is the only thing silence provides. An allowance is enough for everything that ever existed to exist. Nothing more was required. This is why the universe could be unimaginably vast, unimaginably old, unimaginably complex, and still fundamentally unconcerned. Concern is not a prerequisite for structure. Structure arises from rules. Rules operate within silence. This is also why the universe can end without warning. Warnings are sounds. Silence does not make them. The absence of warning is not cruelty. It is consistency. Now the final fear dissolves completely. Not the fear of death, but the fear of interruption. Interruption implies something was meant to continue. Silence does not mean anything was meant to happen at all. Things happened because they were allowed. When they are no longer allowed, they do not stop mid-sentence. There was no sentence, only occurrence. This removes the last trace of unfinished business from the idea of the universe's end. There is no business, there is no ledger. There is no summary, there is only what occurred, occurring while it occurred. That is complete. Silence does not ask for reflection, does not demand acceptance, does not even require recognition. It simply is. And it always was. This is why the journey ends here, not because nothing remains to be said, but because nothing remains that needs interpretation. Silence does not interpret itself. It does not ask to be understood. Understanding arose within silence. And when understanding ends, silence remains unchanged. This is not an ending. It is the background that was always there, now unobstructed. No warning was ever missing. No message was ever withheld. The universe was never speaking, it was always silent. And within that silence, everything that ever existed was allowed to exist, fully, briefly, completely, until it wasn't. And that required no announcement at all. Final part. What was always enough? There is nothing left to remove now, nothing left to reduce, nothing left to explain away. All the layers that once made the universe feel heavy with expectation have already fallen. What remains is not a conclusion, but a state that was present from the beginning and unnoticed until everything else became quiet enough to reveal it. The universe was never incomplete. It did not need a future to justify its past. It did not need duration to validate existence. It did not need witnesses to confirm reality. It simply happened. and while it happened, it was whole. This is the last thing to understand, and it is not dramatic. Completeness does not arrive at the end. It is not something achieved after enough time has passed, enough structure has formed, or enough meaning has accumulated. Completeness exists wherever a state exists. A moment is complete while it occurs. A process is complete while it unfolds. The universe is complete while its rules allow it to exist. Completion is not a reward for survival. It is a property of presence. This is why the idea of an ending without warning no longer feels like a threat. A threat assumes something unfinished, something interrupted, something denied its proper conclusion. But nothing in the universe was waiting for permission to conclude. There was never a requirement to finish, only a requirement to be allowed. An allowance is not retroactive. It does not look backward and judge what occurred. It does not look forward and promise what will come. It exists only in the present configuration of reality. That is enough. This is where the instinct to hold on to understanding finally relaxes. You do not need to remember all of this. You do not need to keep it in mind. You do not need to orient every thought around it. Understanding does not need to be maintained. It does not disappear if attention shifts away. Reality does not collapse if you stop thinking about its limits. This was never about vigilance. It was about removing a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding was that existence needed reinforcement, that it needed to be protected by continuity, that it needed to be validated by endurance. Once that misunderstanding is gone, nothing needs to be done. Existence does not ask for support. It does not request explanation. It does not require agreement. It occurs. This is why the universe feels lighter here, not because it has become safe, but because nothing is being demanded of it anymore. No demand to continue, no demand to warn, no demand to make sense in narrative terms. And nothing is being demanded of you either. You are not responsible for the universe's future. You are not tasked with preserving meaning against entropy. You are not obligated to justify existence through outcomes. Those burdens were never part of the system. They were added by expectation. Expectation has now dissolved completely. What remains is not emptiness. It is sufficiency without excess. The universe does not overflow with purpose. It does not collapse into meaninglessness. It simply behaves according to its structure. That structure allowed stars to burn. It allowed matter to assemble. It allowed complexity to emerge. It allowed awareness to arise. And one day, it may allow none of these things. That does not invalidate what occurred. Invalidation requires a standard that persists beyond the system itself. There is no such standard. When the system ends, evaluation ends with it. Nothing is left unresolved. Nothing is left unfinished. Nothing is left waiting to be explained. This is the last quiet truth. Not that the universe will end, but that it does not need to continue to be complete. This dissolves the final anxiety that was never fully spoken, the anxiety that if everything disappears, then everything was for nothing. There is no for in physics. There is only occurrence. Occurrence does not point beyond itself. It does not need justification. It does not ask whether it was worth happening. That question belongs to observers. When observers are gone, the question is gone with them. Nothing remains unanswered. This is not bleak. Bleakness assumes something is missing. Nothing is missing here. What is present is exactly what physics describes when expectation is removed. A universe that behaves. A present that exists. A future that is not promised. A past that does not require validation. This is the final resting place of the idea of an ending. Not an ending that arrives, but the realization that nothing was ever owed an ending at all. The universe does not close, it does not conclude, it does not resolve. It simply occupies states until it no longer can. And while it occupies them, those states are complete. That includes this one. Right now, nothing needs to be added to it. Nothing needs to be secured. Nothing needs to be carried forward. The universe is not waiting. It is not holding its breath. It is not preparing to stop, it is simply existing in the only way it ever has, moment by moment, condition by condition, without warning, without promise, without regret, and without the need for anything more.